Hello and welcome back to our Essential Facts About Raw Food webinar and open house series. This is our second webinar in the series called How to Get Essential Nutrients on a Raw Food Diet. We're really excited to share with you today some very solid and accurate information about nutrient concerns on a plant-based and raw food diet that could potentially make or break your success with raw food, and that can mean the difference between reaching your health goals or falling short of them. We want all of you to be as successful as possible, and we know that breaking down the hurdles of misinformation, such as the thinking that plant-based diets are deficient in important nutrients, or that you don't know how to design your diet to obtain all of those nutrients in a synergistic way, we know that breaking down those hurdles can help you accomplish what you're trying to achieve for your health. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Dr. Rick Dina, and in a few minutes you'll be hearing from Dr. Karen Dina. We're both chiropractic physicians with a strong interest in plant-based and raw food nutrition, as well as the functional medicine approach to health. We're board certified and licensed in the state of California. We're also the developers of the Science of Raw Food Nutrition series of classes that we taught for 10 years in person. We are the co-developers and instructors of the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive course, which we'll share more about later on in this webinar. Now, from this and from speaking at many conferences and events over the years, we have become known for our thoroughness and scientific accuracy, our ability to make complex, confusing subjects easy to understand, and our encouraging approach that takes unnecessary hurdles out of people's way. You'll get just a little bit of a taste of each of those in today's webinar. We're also the hosts of the Raw for Life Summit 2016, the International Raw Food Summit 2017, and the Raw Food Mastery Summit 2018, as well as the authors of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook. Before we go on, let me make sure that I say that the information and opinions expressed by us in this webinar are not intended to be used as medical advice and should not be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition or as a substitute for individual health care. This webinar is presented with the understanding that we are not liable for misconception, misuse, or adverse effects resulting from its use. Any type of dietary change, nutritional therapy, or fasting should always be undertaken with the supervision of a qualified healthcare practitioner. We may be those practitioners for you, but you won't obtain that just by watching this webinar. So moving on, in the webinar today, we will break through some misunderstandings about where important nutrients come from on a plant-based and raw food diet that can get in the way of people being successful in their quest for better health. Now, when Dr. Karen and I got started with raw food over 28 and 31 years ago, respectively, there were far fewer resources available than there are today. However, much of the information that we got back there was given from doctors and people who were very well educated about nutrition and had clinical experience and saw results, and they shared that information. Now, today, as we know, there's a lot more information than ever available before, but the thing is, anyone with a camera and an agenda sometimes can put information out there. And as a result of that, there is a lot of inaccurate information, misinformation, and conflicting information out there also. And that makes it so difficult for those of you seeking health to try to figure out how to best go about it. Collectively, I call this phenomenon the information age paradox, which once again means there's lots of information available, but compared to when we got started, a much smaller percentage of that information is now accurate. And it's going to get worse over time as the internet continues to expand. But when you have solid, reliable, accurate information, that cuts through all of the confusion out there, and you have a solid foundation in knowing how to implement the best in nutrition for your optimal health. We are committed to helping as many of you take the healthiest, most effective approach possible, supporting your pursuit of optimal health. I'll leave you with a quote from a former student of ours who took our Science of Raw Food Nutrition curriculum, which is the precursor to our expanded and updated Mastering Raw Food Nutrition Online and Interactive curriculum. Denise from Canada says there isn't a better course available designed to arm anyone desiring to improve the health of themselves and others, allowing them to weed through news reports, marketing, and research. Add on top of that a balanced, open approach presented in an inspiring yet modest manner. So feel free to let us know if you agree with this statement by the end of the webinar. Once again, we want to give you accurate information that you can truly use to make a difference in your life. We'd now like to share a little bit with you about what inspired us to start on this path in the first place. First, you'll hear from Dr. Karen, and then from myself.
I found raw food at a time when I was experiencing notable fatigue, for which there was apparently no answer. I was in college at the time and was sleeping 10, 12, and sometimes even more hours per night, and still waking up non-refreshed. I saw 3 medical professionals, and after multiple lab tests and evaluations, I had a diagnosis: fatigue of unknown origin. They had a whole list of everything I didn't have, but could not pinpoint the source of my fatigue. I asked every single one of them if my fatigue had anything to do with my college diet and lifestyle. They all emphatically said no. Things started to change, however, when a friend gave me a copy of a book that discussed vegan diets and the connection between diet and health. I also learned about the connections between diet and the environment and the way animals are treated. With all of these compelling arguments, I was open to giving this approach a try, and I became vegan. In addition to feeling good about eating compassionately and leaving a lighter footprint on the earth, I was so excited to find that my fatigue actually started to improve, despite what the so-called experts, in this case the medical professionals, said would happen. This personal experience opened the door to my thinking that diet really could make a difference in health and left me open to exploring other opportunities. Then when I learned about and implemented a raw food diet, my energy soared far beyond the impressive improvements I experienced by eating vegan. Now, in our 3-part video series, I shared the story of my introduction to raw food. Long story short, my fatigue vanished, along with a variety of other symptoms I'd had for years. And I had more energy than I knew what to do with. I could not remember a time when I felt better. I started to look healthier, I slept better, I enjoyed exercising, and my digestion improved. I was so inspired by the health results I was experiencing that I felt compelled to learn more about the inner workings of the human body, nutrition, and the diet-health connection. I really wanted to immerse myself in learning as much as I could, so I earned a 2nd undergraduate degree in biology and received doctorate-level education in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic, which helped me to put everything I observed into perspective and on a much deeper level. Over the years, I've refined and revised my approach to raw food and tailored it to my individual needs, and we can show you how to do this too.
Now that you've heard from Dr. Karen, I'd like to share a little bit of my story with you. So here I was in 1986, not feeling my best. I was having a lot of allergy trouble in those days, which actually was a major part of most of my childhood. I have it in a way to thank because I felt so lousy, I was motivated to try to learn about some things to help be healthier. A few months after this, I started making major changes in my diet. And then fast forwarding to the spring of 1987, I went totally vegan with lots of raw foods included. So here I was in the summer of 1987. I'm the guy on the right here. And my brother was on the left, and you can tell his muscles are a bit more defined than mine. He had been at it for longer, but I was really starting to feel good. And I had been reading at the time that some people were saying, well, if you want to build muscle, you have to eat muscle. And if you only eat plant foods, you're going to wither away. Yet I was going to the gym regularly. My brother and I were about to go off on our landscaping job. That's why we were dressed that way. We had shirts on before the picture, though. And I was building muscle. My muscles were getting bigger. I was adding more weights to the machines, and it seemed to be working. So a few months into veganism at that point, and just a couple of months into working out pretty seriously. So moving forward to Thanksgiving of 1987, I ran in a 5-mile race in my town, well-known race, and I was giving it all I've got there, as the caption says. My mom just happened to get a picture of me near the finish line, really going for it. So that was a great race. I'll never forget. There I am with my brother at the end of the race, the muscular guy you saw next to me a few slides ago. And he was really into running also. And normally he would have been running in that race as well, except he had just finished a 7-day fast, and it wasn't appropriate for him to run yet. And so for us at the time, fasting was like the new frontier. You know, we started out with eating less fat and more fiber, and then moving to vegan and then raw. And then now we were all excited about fasting. And in fact, a few months after this photo was taken, I fasted on water only for 14 days, which among other benefits made a night and day improvement in my allergy issues. And I was absolutely delighted about that. So how did I do in the race? Well, let's take a look here. If you take a look at the bottom left, that might be a little bit hard to see. So let's bring a close up here. I ran this 5-mile race in 29 minutes and 7 seconds. So some of you who are runners might know out there, if you know, 8-minute mile pace for a 5-minute mile is number 600, you could probably guess better than I could how many people were in the race. But I'm going to guess 1,200 at least, maybe 1,500 or so people in the race. And I came in 37th. And I ran track in high school, but I wasn't especially good. But it seemed like all of a sudden I was, really up there with athletic performance. And looking back, I had been a vegan, mostly raw, for 6 months at that point. And I'm going to say that that was likely a major contributing factor. So here are the results of that race, which I mentioned. A couple other races that I'm proud of. In 1993, it was early in chiropractic school for me. I ran the Atlanta Half Marathon in a little under 1 hour and 27 minutes. So that's a 6 minutes and 38-second pace on average for 13 miles. In 1994, I ran my second 5K race. I had run one earlier where I did pretty well, but then I wanted to do better the next time. So I did some track workouts, and I ran that race in just over 17 minutes, which is a 5.5 minute mile pace for just over 3 miles. And I remember in that race, I came in 5th place, and there were like 600 or 800 runners in that race. So, I was thinking back to the people who were telling me that I wasn't going to get enough protein on this type of diet. It started to seem really silly by that point. So fast forwarding to 1999, my girlfriend at the time went to an amusement park, and this was some big giant pterodactyl on top of this truck at the top. And you can see there that I've got some pretty good muscle development. I was mostly running at the time, but I was going to the gym a couple of times a week, and I had been doing so for a year or so at that point, and was building muscle as a result. And then a few months later, I believe this was the summer of 1999, so 12 years into being a raw vegan. And unfortunately, I was sedentary more of that time than I was active, but every time I started to get active, give it a few months, and I seem to be doing really well. So Once again, people had been telling me for 12 or so years now that I wasn't going to be getting enough protein, and it seemed really silly, not just from my own experiences, but from meeting other people as well, and also studying the science behind it. So even though I was extremely convinced, and I'm just using protein as an example here, that I was getting enough of that, I knew that so much of the information people were spreading out there was inaccurate. And this is the type of thing, for example, that can keep people from going on a plant-based diet because they're concerned they're not getting enough protein, and then they go down a different path that may not serve them as well. And I know people who've actually had heart attacks and other things because of that particular misunderstanding. Now, unfortunately, there are lots of other misconceptions that have persisted over time. People get very concerned, not only about protein, but about where do you get your all sorts of other nutrients, vitamin B12 and D and K2, calcium, iron, selenium, zinc, omega-3s, and the list goes on. So to help alleviate some of these concerns, in this webinar, Dr. Karen is going to speak to you about a couple of key nutrients that are important to know about on any diet, which includes plant-based and raw food diets, and then I'll have some additional information to share about each of those from a clinician's perspective, in having analyzed the lab work of vegans and raw vegans I've worked with over the years, much like the format we utilized in our first webinar in this series on fructose and fat.
And now we'll discuss how to get essential nutrients from whole natural plant foods. And if you've been involved in the raw food, vegan, and plant-based community for any length of time, you've likely been asked the ever-popular, where do you get your types of questions? And so today we're going to answer some of those questions for you. Our first nutrient that we'll cover is iron. Now, what is iron exactly? We know that it's an important nutrient, but more specifically, iron is an element. And since it's an element, it can therefore be found on the periodic table of the elements. And let's see where iron is. There it is right there. So we know that iron is an element, and for nutritional purposes, we can call it a mineral. Now, it's involved in a number of activities in the body, including the formation of red blood cells. And in red blood cells, iron is involved in carrying oxygen from our lungs to our tissues. It's also involved in carrying carbon dioxide from our tissues back to our lungs, where it can be breathed out or exhaled. Essentially, iron plays an important role in the oxygenation of our tissues. And sometimes when people are low in iron and they have an iron deficiency, then their body's ability to oxygenate its tissues is compromised. So sometimes these people experience fatigue. Now, when I was experiencing fatigue in college, an iron test was one of the things that I was given. Now, as it turned out, I was not iron deficient, so my doctors looked onto other possibilities. Now, other functions iron is involved with in our body would include energy production and immune system function, among others. There are two main dietary forms of iron, the heme form and the non-heme form. Now, the heme form of iron is found in animal foods and supplements. And when I say animal foods, I'm mostly referring to red meat. Now, many different supplements I've seen contain the heme form of iron, and how I can tell is by looking on the supplement bottle or container on the ingredients list. And if I see the words ferrous sulfate, that means that the supplement contains the heme form of iron. Now, the non-heme form of iron is a type of iron that is found in plant foods. Now, I don't know if you've heard this, but many times I've heard people say that the iron that's found in animal foods is more easily absorbed than the iron that is found in plant foods. And my answer to that idea is this. It's a little bit more specific than that. As it turns out, the form of iron found in plant foods is more selectively absorbed than the iron found in animal foods. And what that means is that with a non-heme form of iron, the iron status of the person affects absorption. So this form of iron is absorbed more readily when it's needed by the body and less readily when it's not needed, which is actually really good because iron is a really important mineral, but we don't want too much of it. Now, the heme form of iron is less selectively absorbed, which means that the body absorbs this form of iron whether or not it needs it. The bottom line is that having enough iron is important, but too much can be potentially problematic. And the reason why is because iron can act like a free radical. Now, a free radical is a molecule that can cause damage to body tissues in addition to other health problems. And excess iron intake may be associated with a variety of different health challenges. Now, in the case of iron toxicity, I've heard of that occurring with children who consume too many iron supplements, such as when they get into the supplement cabinet, and that may be the result. So we have to be careful with that. Now, colorectal cancer has some association with high iron intake from dietary sources, and there are some good studies done on this association. There are also studies showing that excess iron intake from dietary sources may be associated with an increased risk for heart disease because iron can act like a free radical and potentially cause damage in the form of oxidation to the plaque that lines one's arteries. And then there are other health challenges that may be associated with excess iron intake from dietary sources. Shifting gears a little bit here, there are some substances that we find in certain foods that can bind to iron and make it less usable by the human body. Oxalic acid, also known as oxalate, is one of those substances. Maybe you've heard of it before. Now, oxalate binds to iron and certain other minerals, making them less bioavailable to our body or less useful to our body. And oxalates are found in a number of foods, but certain foods are very high in oxalate, making them not good sources of iron. And some examples would include spinach, rhubarb, Swiss chard, beet greens, and parsley. Now, it's important to note that these are not bad foods. They're just not good sources of iron, especially when they're raw. Now, many of these foods actually have a lot of iron in them, but most of that iron is bound to oxalate within the food and therefore is not usable by our body. Additionally, it's important to note that oxalate will not steal iron or other minerals from your body. That's really good to know. Kind of the bottom line here is that oxalate within certain foods binds to iron and makes that iron less usable by our body. So the ones that we've mentioned here, including spinach, rhubarb, Swiss chard, beet greens, and parsley, are good examples of food that are high in oxalate. Here's a table showing the oxalic acid content of some of the foods that we just mentioned. And as you can see here, parsley, chives, purslane, spinach, and beet greens are much higher in oxalic acid than the others that are further down on the table. It's difficult to avoid oxalic acid altogether, but if we focus our diet on lower oxalate foods, less of our dietary iron will be bound to oxalate and will therefore be more available for use by our body for important processes such as the formation of red blood cells and assisting with carrying oxygen from our lungs to our tissues. Once again, focusing one's diet on lower oxalate foods, such as those on this table, can increase the amount of bioavailable iron in our diet. Now, these foods are good sources of iron, and they're low in oxalate, and those would include kale, dandelion greens, broccoli, romaine lettuce, bok choy, and many others. The foods on this table are just examples. I mention them here because they are popularly consumed on raw plant-based diets. Now, I've seen people focus on spinach as their main leafy green without knowing that much of the iron in spinach is actually bound to oxalate. And this is one of the reasons why I encourage people to include a variety of leafy greens in their diet, rather than just focusing on one or two. Now, on this table, we see that 3 cups of chopped kale contains 3.42 milligrams of iron, and 2 cups of dandelion greens loosely packed contains 3.41 milligrams of iron. These numbers are excellent. If we compare these amounts to the daily values for iron, we see that they are impressive. The iron recommended dietary allowance for men and postmenopausal women is 8 milligrams and 18 milligrams for premenopausal women. Additionally, the iron content of broccoli, romaine lettuce, and bok choy are also great. There are some non-leafy green sources of iron, and we have them listed here on this table. So we see that chia seeds, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, and hemp seeds also contain significant amounts of iron. That's good news. Now, it's very interesting to see the nutrient content of individual foods, but how much iron do we find in foods when they're eaten together? We have an example here of a medium-sized salad. That's medium-sized for Dr. Rick and I. For somebody getting started with a raw food diet, this might be a larger size salad. So in our salad, we have 4 cups of romaine lettuce, 2 cups of dandelion greens chopped and loosely packed, 1 cup of grated cucumber, 1 cup of grated carrots, and 1 cup of chopped tomatoes. And we have a simple dressing with 1 tablespoon of sesame tahini and 1 tablespoon of fresh squeezed lemon juice. All of these ingredients have a total of 9.3 milligrams of iron. This is excellent when we compare to the recommended dietary allowances for iron. Once again, the iron recommended dietary allowance for men and postmenopausal women is 8 milligrams and 18 milligrams for premenopausal women. From this salad and dressing, we have exceeded the iron daily value for both men and postmenopausal women. That's excellent. Here are some photos of the salad and the dressing. And as you can see, this salad is the size of a mixing bowl. Next, Dr. Rick is going to share with you some lab values about iron. So take it away, Dr. Rick.
Hello again, everybody. And moving on here to some ways to measure the iron status within your body individually, we're going to look at some common lab tests. And in particular, we're going to look at one known as the complete blood count, which in some countries is known as a full blood count. Now, we're not going to look at all of the numbers on there, just a selected few that are very important. And what's really interesting about these is once we understand a little bit about what iron does, we can know a great deal about the iron status in your body by looking at these numbers, even if we never measure iron directly. And I'll explain why while we're at it. Then we're going to look at another quick test known as ferritin at the end, which is not part of a complete or a full blood count, but nevertheless can be very useful. So to talk a little bit more about hemoglobin, if we take a look in the upper right here, we see a red blood cell. And if we took a little chunk, actually much smaller than the square there shows, we would see hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is made up of heme, as we can see here. This molecule is called heme, and it has an iron in the center of it, and it's made of some proteins too. And each hemoglobin has 4 hemes. Those 2 are easy to see. There's the 3rd one, and the 4th one is hiding there within it. So there are about 250 million hemoglobin molecules in every red blood cell. And because each hemoglobin molecule has 4 hemes, and at the center of each heme is an iron atom, that's a lot of iron that adds up in the body in our hemoglobin in the red blood cells. So about 65% of the total iron in the body is part of the structure of hemoglobin. And the 8 milligrams and the 18 milligram recommendations that Dr. Karen spoke about in most people allow enough iron for all of this to work properly. So moving on here, we can just see, just for fun, that we have hemoglobin in red blood cells. It collects and binds to oxygen and transports that oxygen via hemoglobin through the red blood cells to all of the tissues in the body. So there's some red blood cells and platelets and white blood cells traveling through a blood vessel to give you another visual on that. And this has to happen properly because we all know how important oxygen is for our brain to function right, to have enough energy, to make our muscles work right, to enhance our athletic performance, to help wounds heal. Oxygen's really, really important stuff. So we need enough iron to make enough hemoglobin to deliver oxygen all around the body via the red blood cells carrying the hemoglobin. So going on to some actual lab work here from a CBC, again, a complete blood count, also known as a full blood count. We'll start out by looking at hemoglobin, seeing we just talked about that. And we can see that they're looking at grams of hemoglobin per deciliter of blood. We can see the reference range here, and we can see that this patient's hemoglobin level is solidly in the middle. So that alone is a good indicator that their iron status is very good. Moving on to hematocrit. Well, what's that? Well, we saw here in the blood that there's a lot of red blood cells, but there's some platelets, there's some white blood cells, and within in between these spaces is this stuff called plasma. And that's a watery liquid that contains things like glucose and vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and antioxidants and hormones and all different other things that are being carried in the bloodstream as well. So if we take a look at some blood that we put in a tube, if you were to actually put this tube in a centrifuge, what would happen is the red blood cells are heaviest. And they contain iron, they contain some metal, so they're heavier, so they all sink to the bottom. We see a few white blood cells and platelets in the middle, and then we see the plasma at the top. So if you measure this total volume of blood, and then you see what percentage of it is composed of red blood cells, that is how you determine this value called hematocrit. And we can see the units are in percentage. So for men, typically, this lab's a little bit different, but typically from 40 to 50% of the total blood volume needs to be red blood cells, and that gives you a good hematocrit level. This patient's was 46.2. For women, that number goes from 35 to 45, so a little bit different. So that is what hematocrit is. So if you are low in iron, you do not make enough hemoglobin, and therefore there's not enough hemoglobin filling up the red blood cells, and the total red blood cell volume decreases, and then you get low hematocrit. And in the next few tests, we'll actually explain why that occurs. Total red blood cell volume may or may not be off if you have low iron. So moving on to this next one, it's called MCV, or mean corpuscular volume, which translated into English means the size of your average red blood cell. We can see here the reference range is 79 to 97. I traditionally learned 80 to 100, so that's pretty close. This patient's right in the middle there at 91, and that's what we want to see. Now, we said that there are about 250 million hemoglobin molecules in every red blood cell. If you don't have enough iron, you can't produce hemoglobin because it is part of the physical raw material that makes up hemoglobin. So when you have fewer hemoglobins, you don't get as many hemoglobins per red blood cell. So what happens then is the size of the red blood cell decreases. Now, it's kind of like if you have a water balloon and you let some of the water out, it's going to get smaller. So as a result, you would see a low MCV. You might see something like 85 or 82. And if you're really severely low in iron, it might be down there in the 70s or something like that. and you need to take some serious action right away to get that up, because at that point you're probably feeling fatigued and having all sorts of difficulty. So another measurement that, even though indirect, tells us a great deal about the iron status in the body. And then MCH stands for mean corpuscular hemoglobin. Now, we looked up here at the total amount of hemoglobin in all of the red blood cells collectively in grams per deciliter, but mean corpuscular hemoglobin means the amount of hemoglobin in each red blood cell. And if you're low in iron, there's not as many hemoglobins in each red blood cell. So number one, we can have a decrease in the red blood cell size, like we just mentioned. And we can also, usually we'd see a decrease in the amount of hemoglobin per red blood cell. And this really comes into play also when we look at other causes of anemia, such as B12 deficiency anemia, in which case some of these numbers look similar and some of them look different. And when we understand the physiology of what's behind this, then and we have some clinical experience, then we can look at these numbers and once again tell a great deal about our iron status. So we talked about hemoglobin, 2 different ways of measuring that. We talked about hematocrit, the total volume of your blood that's made up of red blood cells compared to the total volume, the red blood cell count, and the red blood cell size. Let's mention this other one very briefly, known as ferritin. As you can see here on the slide, ferritin is the storage form of iron. And if you remember back to what Dr. Karen said about heme versus non-heme iron, heme iron found in animal foods and some supplements gets absorbed whether you need it or not, whereas non-heme iron from plant foods is absorbed selectively. So if you're low in iron, you'll absorb more. If you are good in iron, you won't absorb as much. And that gives an advantage to plant eaters because excess iron acts as a pro-oxidant, exactly the opposite of an antioxidant. So it accelerates the aging process and causes free radical damage to many tissues all over the body. So because most people who go in and get their lab work done, because that reflects most people in society, are omnivores, there is more storage iron from them absorbing excessive amounts, which indicates excess free radical potential as well when we look at ferritin. So if we look at the typical bell curve distribution, in people who are on a plant-based diet, the ferritin levels tend to be near the lower end of the normal range. But as far as all the other measurements on the CBC are concerned, if all of those look good, but ferritin happens to be a little lower than the average reference range where people are absorbing oftentimes too much, then that is perfectly good. So now that we've talked about ferritin, we'll check that one off. So we hope you have enjoyed these few tidbits about iron and the lab values related to it. And now Dr. Karen is going to talk to us about another important nutrient known as selenium.
The next nutrient we will discuss is selenium, also known as selenium. And just like iron, selenium is an element and is found on the periodic table of the elements. There's selenium right there. Now, also like iron, selenium is an important mineral. And I'm covering selenium here today because fruits and vegetables tend to be low in selenium. But fortunately, there is one very rich source that we'll talk about shortly. Selenium has some important functions in the body, so it's important to know good sources. It functions with an enzyme in our body known as glutathione peroxidase. And maybe some of you have heard of glutathione before. Now, glutathione peroxidase is responsible for converting free radicals into water. Now, free radicals, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, are molecules that are very reactive and can cause damage to cells in our body. So glutathione peroxidase helps to transform these dangerous molecules into harmless water, and selenium plays an important role in this process. Additionally, selenium plays an essential role in the activation of thyroid hormone, also known as T3. The recommended dietary allowance for selenium is 55 micrograms with an upper limit of 400 micrograms. So, what is a reliable source of selenium on a raw plant-based diet? The answer is Brazil nuts. Now, one Brazil nut contains 165% of the recommended dietary allowance for selenium, making Brazil nuts one of the richest sources of selenium. And an average-sized Brazil nut contains almost 91 micrograms of selenium. Now, Dr. Rick and I usually have Brazil nuts a few times a week to cover our selenium needs. And there are other foods that contain selenium, but none of them are nearly as rich in selenium as Brazil nuts are. For example, sunflower seeds are a decent source of selenium, but one would have to eat a lot of them to get close to the recommended dietary allowance. Now, we've been teaching about selenium in Brazil nuts for years, and we're really happy to share this information with you. We want your success.
And back with another clinical assessment. One way of knowing somebody's selenium status is to look at a thyroid panel if that thyroid panel is comprehensive enough. So there is a great deal to consider when it comes to thyroid function. It's a very extensive topic. What I'm going to share with you now is just a very small tidbit of what we could say is a partial functional assessment of selenium status, but nevertheless a useful one. It's kind of analogous to looking at a complete blood count and iron, but not quite as strong or direct. But once again, it can certainly be useful. Thyroid hormones are often measured as part of general lab testing, and they are things I like to order and see on my patients as well. So to give just a quick, relevant discussion of thyroid function is that the primary product of our thyroid gland is known as T4. So that's the main thing that the thyroid gland does. It makes this stuff called T4. It only makes a little bit of T3, but T3 is the most metabolically active thyroid hormone. It's far more metabolically active than T4. So most of the T3 in the body, again, doesn't come from the thyroid gland itself, but it comes from T4 being converted into T3 in the peripheral tissues of the body, primarily in the liver and in the kidneys. So in order to convert T4 into T3, there are several things that have to happen and go properly. One of those things is that selenium is involved in activating the enzyme that converts T4 into T3. So if you're looking at a thyroid panel, which includes T4 and T3, not all of them have that. Sometimes they just look at TSH or just TSH and T4. And while that's useful, if you also have T3 there, you can look at how much T4 you have and how much T3 you have. And if, for example, T4 is solidly in the middle and so is T3, that is a darn good indicator that your body is converting T4 into T3 effectively and appropriately. And once again, in order for that conversion to happen properly, selenium is involved. So if you were too low in selenium, that conversion process would not happen properly, and you would start to have things like weight gain and sluggishness and brain fog, and you might start to lose your hair or your eyelashes start to thin out, or you would find that despite eating a really healthy diet, your cholesterol level is elevated and other issues like that. And sometimes, again, it's a complex topic here, but sometimes the solution is as simple as eating a few Brazil nuts to get enough selenium to make that conversion happen properly. So once again, a little clinical tidbit of real life assessment of one way to partially determine what your selenium status is in your body directly. We talked about just a tiny sliver of information, and there is so much more where this came from. So if knowing information like this to help you succeed with raw food and plant-based diets, to experience a higher level of health is important to you, then we have a solution. If raw food science explained to you in easy to understand terms in a fun format with plenty of time to sink in, a manageable time commitment, and plenty of opportunity to ask questions and get clarification directly from us is important to you, then we invite you to join us for our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition and Educator course. It's a 12-month class that begins on August 29th of 2018 coming up. The time commitment is about 2 to 3 hours per week. And what that 2 to 3 hours a week consists of is, number one, professional quality videos similar to what you saw here in this webinar. And number one, you can watch these videos whenever you want. They're available 24/7 in our membership site. We also break the 2 hours into generally 20 to 30 minute video segments. So you don't have to watch 2 hours all at once. You can watch 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, whatever the case may be. We've designed it to be as convenient as possible to work into people's modern lives. Now, another thing to consider is that 2 hours of these videos is often hundreds of hours worth of investigating and reading and learning and checking things out and figuring out what's most important out there and what's not so important. And then we hone that down into 2 hours to deliver it to you in a way that makes sense and that you can understand. I know sometimes people get confused when they say, oh, well, this course is 500 or 800 hours and yours is only 100. Well, the thing is, you can go read this stuff. That's what they tell you to do. Here, go read this stuff. I'm like, wow, that would be easy if we were administering a course like that. You know, go read this stuff and then take a test. Well, the thing is, we've done that reading for you. We've done that research. We've done that investigation. And there are certain things like our clinical experience that you can't read anywhere else, because how many raw food clinicians are there out there sharing their actual real-life clinical experience in a way that makes sense to people? So it's 2 hours worth of a lot of information really honed down so you can get so much out of just a very reasonable time commitment. So before we offered this course, the precursor to this course was our Science of Raw Food Nutrition classes that we taught in person for 10 years. When we did that, we had a 12-hour 2-day course that started out the curriculum. And here's a couple of quotes from some students who took that 12-hour 2-day course. One of them said, I've gotten more from these 2 days than I got in a year at the, and they didn't say the name, but the well-known nutrition program. I'm looking forward to the next segment. Another student said the sheer quantity and quality of information packed into 2 days by extremely knowledgeable and professional presenters was outstanding. So in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online course, we have a couple of quotes here. Anne-Marie from Paris said, I love my weekly videos, and you can see some of the video thumbnails popping up here of the different topics that we cover, just a little sampling of them. And Cynthia from Southern California said, the course content is awesome. And as you'll see later, Cynthia had an extensive background in raw food nutrition before taking this course, and actually Anne-Marie had a pretty solid background as well. So in addition to these finely honed, very informative videos, we also have notebooks that go along with the videos designed to complement them. We actually send you 4 notebooks over the course of the year, and it's over 900 pages worth of notes. And also included in there are the thousands of scientific references that we utilized to put our curriculum together. So if there's anything you want to go look up directly for yourself, you've got the information in order to do that. So the reason I say that these notebooks are designed to complement the videos is because in a lot of courses that we've seen before, online courses, what they do is they take sort of the easy way out for notes, and they just get some software that listens to the video and then makes a transcript of things in paragraph form. Now, if we did that, that sure would have been a lot easier for us. But what we did instead is we really thought things through. And we thought, okay, how would we want it to be in the notebook here if we had the notebook open when we were following along with the videos? And how would we want it if we just opened it up and wanted to look at things? So we've got bullet points, we've got the charts and graphs that you see up on the videos in the notebooks. And that way, when you're watching the videos, you don't have to go crazy trying to write down everything we said, because the majority of that is in your notebooks. That allows you to pay attention to what you're seeing on the screen and be able to watch everything and be able to listen to everything, knowing that it's in the notebooks also, and it really allows it to sink in. So they are a great complement to the learning process. Now, some students still like to, take extra notes and fill things in, and that's fine. And because this is a video that you're watching, you can hit pause, you can go back, you can listen again. So it's very, very thorough. And another nice part of these notebooks is that they are lifetime reference material. So at any time in the future, you've got your notebooks there to go quickly take a look at to refresh your memory about something that you are interested in. And our students just absolutely love the notebooks. That's what they've told us directly, as well as when we have sent out surveys. So in addition to that, 6 to 8 times per month, we have conference calls. So those are on Tuesdays, and there's 2 different times to accommodate different schedules as well as different time zones, because we have students from all over the world. So they allow you to ask us questions and interact with us directly. So one of the ways you can do that is you can either call in on the phone, as it shows here, or access it through your computer. And you can either raise your hand and ask us questions directly, and we're in real time there. Or another option is that every Monday before we have the Tuesday calls, we send all of our students out an email. And that email has the call-in information as well as the URL computer links to access the calls. If you click on those links prior to the call, you can type in your questions in advance. Then we will see those questions when we're on the call, answer them to the best of our ability, and then we save and record all of the calls. So if you're able to not make a call, maybe occasionally, or maybe even one call doesn't fit into your schedule at all, you can still get direct interaction with us as part of the course by submitting your questions in advance and then listening to the calls afterwards. Instead of just giving you some reading material and telling you to take the test, or maybe just showing up once a month or something like that, we are there many times per month, almost weekly. We take the last Tuesday of each month off, but other than that, we're there every Tuesday to make sure that you can interact with us and get any clarification and make sure that this all really makes sense to you. And we love answering questions. It's just, we look forward to Tuesdays now very much to interact with our students. In addition to that, we have a Facebook group for our students, and it's optional. Not all of our students do it, but most of them take advantage of that. So first of all, it's a great way for our students to get to know each other. They're also very helpful to support the conference calls. So oftentimes a student will ask a really good question during the conference call, and we'll share some information, again, answer things to the best of our ability. And then oftentimes we'll think, we've got a chart or an article or something else, either that we've got on our computer or that we've seen online, and we don't have the time to submit that right then because we're on the call, but once the call is over, we'll oftentimes add some extra things into the Facebook group that you can go look and we'll tag your name on there. So it's very helpful in support of the calls, as well as just to have a general sense of community. So a few other things to mention about the structuring of the class. So exposure versus cohesion. On the one hand, there are two of us. And Dr. Karen and I, for roughly the first 15 years on our raw food and plant-based paths, that was largely independent of each other. And for the last roughly 15 years or so, that has been together. And so on the one hand, we have a broad perspective. There's two of us, and we look at things a little bit differently. But on the other hand, we are a married couple and we love this stuff. This is what we talk about when we go out on walks and when we're driving and those types of things. And we are able to use both of us to integrate everything together so it all falls into place and it all makes a lot of sense. The previous incarnation of Mastering Raw Food Nutrition was known as the Science of Raw Food Nutrition that we taught in person for 10 years. Piles and piles of rave reviews from that, and oftentimes there was not enough time to answer questions and to have discussion. The way we've got it set up now online is for every 2 hours or so worth of content, there's an hour typically, and sometimes those calls go quite a bit longer. We just stay till we answer all the questions. There's roughly an hour worth of time in small groups for students to ask us questions. So there's more than enough time and a lot more than we had to interact with us directly. May sound ironic, but much more time to interact with us directly than our students got when we taught this class in person. The other thing we've noticed is that the questions that our online students ask us are a lot more in depth, and they show that our students understand the material much better than our in-person students did. And again, that's because you're not bombarded with 7 hours a day worth of information day after day after day after day. You get 2 hours a week, you watch it again, you get to think about it, you get to talk to us about it, and everything sinks in at a much deeper level. So we've been actually absolutely delighted about how things have been going. And we're a little over halfway. We're getting near the last quarter of our second year of having this class online. And of course, going into our third year, starting late August. And it's basically been working out really, really well. We're very happy with it from an educator's perspective. Now, speaking of education, many of our students go on to incorporate the information learned in our course into their raw food coaching practice, into their other types of educational endeavors. Some people decide to take that up once they've learned all the good information from our class, but many of our students just want the information for themselves to help lead the healthiest lives possible. And even when that's the case, oftentimes, whether you want to be or not, you become an educator. Because people see how you eat once you start eating differently, and they start asking you, oh my God, can you get enough protein? And what about calcium and iron and B12 and essential fatty acids? And doesn't fructose all turn into fat? And, on and on and on. And so we teach you in the course, especially once we get near the end of the course, we teach you how to integrate all the information together and to share that with other people in a way that creates rapport instead of conflict. Because when you're confident in what you're doing that's different than everybody else, you're much less likely to be stressed about it. And that, of course, is a really important part of health. The other benefit is that you'll be so much less likely to be led off track. No one will be able to knock you down with misinformation. You guys know, Dr. Karen and I, we know the science and we know our own personal data, and we know the data from many, many people that we've worked with. So in fact, not only would I not be deterred if I were in the mood to, depending on the situation, put on my diplomacy hat, I could very much turn that around to a learning experience for that person and a confidence builder for me. In fact, we got an email a little over a year ago from one of our first year Mastering Raw Food Nutrition students. Just out of the blue, this email shows up and the subject line was sharing a great experience. And here's what she said. She said, "Doctors Rick and Karen, I had the most amazing experience yesterday evening and today. I'm in Monaco on business and I had meetings with 4 business people. It started out yesterday evening as I started my diatribe about nutrition. I started in reaction to a comment over dinner from one woman who referred to the fact that her husband ate lots of eggs and meat because he is a bodybuilder. A couple irrelevant things in there. And then she said, then I went on about how the body only needs the daily requirement of protein and the balance will be converted to energy via glucose or stored as fat, and how the fat is also used for energy. Then I turned to the balance between omega-3s and 6s and the inflammatory effects of omega-6s. Then I moved on to cholesterol and why we do not need it and how our liver produces it in the production of bile, being clear on how it is needed to emulsify fat, even the fats we get from eating vegetables, with a special comment about the omega-3s in leafy greens. The next morning at another meeting, they wanted more. And after explaining in some detail how the wrong mix of fat makes the structure of cells stiff and rigid, resulting in resistance for hormones, insulin, and serotonin, and the further consequences of each of those, and how too many omega-6s cause inflammation in our bodies, resulting in various disease processes. She says, I went on to calorie optimization overall and why overeating is bad, having too many free radicals and not enough antioxidants is bad, and why a meat and egg diet is deficient in vitamins, phytonutrients, and fiber. We talked about satiety and I shared how excess weight can cause dysfunctions in the hormones controlling satiety. I was on a roll and everyone in the meeting listened with pure fascination. I must admit I was also listening to myself with pure fascination. They were all just like I was before I started the course. They didn't know even the fundamentals of nutrition. How is it possible that so many well-educated people know so little about nutrition? Knowledge is power, and I felt totally empowered today. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have never been as interested in any learning experience in my entire life, and I am simply bursting with enthusiasm and passion. You have changed my life forever. So there's one example where a student realized how much she had learned from the course in a real-life experience, and instead of being the weirdo eating her salad off to the side, she took a leadership role in that interaction and had a good influence on other people also. So those are the types of things that can come about when you are really well educated about any subject, in this case about nutrition. We mentioned Anne-Marie from Paris before, who said she loved her weekly videos. Her official testimonial for the class says, I find it very helpful to have the point of view of doctors who are really impartial in their opinions and who explain things with scientific studies and fact, not philosophic thoughts, and who do not sell anything. I feel very lucky to be able to ask any questions each week and always receive a good response. I've learned a lot. I understand much more now, even though I studied biology and have read a lot of books about raw food nutrition. She said since then, but the real translation was prior to the class starting. She says, I hope there will be a second year for us to enter even deeper into the science of raw food. Thanks to you, Karen and Rick Dina. So when we hear that an enthusiastic student wants even more of what we have to offer, that makes us feel good that we're on the right track. Cynthia, who you heard from earlier from Southern California, said, I've been practicing a raw food lifestyle since 1998 when I did an internship at the Tree of Life with Dr. Gabriel Cousens. I really appreciate Dr. Rick and Karen's scientific approach to the subject of raw food nutrition and have appreciated learning the scientific basis of why this way of living is so beneficial. And one of the reasons that science is so important to Cynthia is because she is a real world scientist. She's a wildlife biologist that goes out in the field, and for weeks and sometimes months at a time, she camps in a tent and makes scientific observations. And so she knows the value of that, and she really appreciated that from our course. Now, if you don't have a background in biology and science like Anne-Marie and Cynthia, don't worry, we make it understandable for you. Here are a couple quotes from our previous Science of Raw Food Nutrition students. One said, "Thank you for your extreme efforts to reach the non-nerds. You were very organized, and I never worried that I would not have my questions answered. This was very professional and respectful of all levels of previous knowledge." Another student said the real strength of this course is the willingness of both presenters to engage students and respond to questions. Keep it up. And like I said, we love our Tuesdays where we get to interact and engage with our students and talk about raw food nutrition, our favorite topic. A couple of other quotes from our actual Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online students. So Monica from Southern California said, "I have taken many classes," and she means in plant-based and raw food nutrition. She said, "This was the most responsibly taught with high quality current content. It is one of the best classes I have ever taken." And Natalia in the beautiful Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico said, "This course gives you the knowledge and tools to be educated about plant-based and raw food nutrition. It's based on scientific researchers, awesome teachers. Thanks, Dr. Karen and Rick, for this exceptional course. It is so worth it." And this is just a small sampling of the testimonials we've received over the years from our curriculum. So in other words, there's lots and lots more where those came from, but we're going to keep things moving here in order to wrap up. So bottom line here to summarize is that you get 2 hours of professionally made videos per week. You get 900 pages and 4 notebooks thoughtfully designed to complement the videos and be lifetime reference material so information can sink in more easily. We have those 6 to 8 times per month conference calls where you can interact with us either directly or with a little bit of time delay, but it's still direct one-on-one interaction with us. If you ask a question, we answer it, then you'll listen to the call afterwards. We also have a Facebook group added as extra support. All of this is designed to give you the experience where you can learn the information and get the inspiration and the confidence to follow through on it for a lifetime of supercharged health.
Remember earlier when I told you my story about my decision to try raw food when I was in an energy pit of fatigue? Well, now it's time for you to make a decision. You're watching this webinar because you're interested in plant-based and raw food nutrition and in taking your knowledge to the next level so you can supercharge your health and maintain it for a lifetime. At this point, you already know if you want to learn more from us. This class will only be offered once this year, and once it fills, it won't be offered again until summer of 2019 and likely at a higher price. Right now, we're offering this course at a special early bird price for a limited time. As you've heard, our students are so happy with the new online format, and we've noticed a difference too. You can watch the course videos on your own schedule and rewatch them as many times as you would like. This way, you'll have plenty of time for the information to sink in. In addition, you'll receive the support of a comprehensive set of notes and near-weekly question and answer sessions in real time in small groups directly with us. We love connecting with our students, and we'll be there with you the whole way. You can access this course anywhere you have an internet connection, which is most places on this planet. On this webinar page, you'll find a link where you can click and sign up for a time to speak with us to answer any questions you may have about our curriculum, the structure of the class, and to help determine if it's a good fit for you. We invite you to sign up for a time to speak with us about your health goals and how mastering raw food nutrition can help you reach them. We look forward to speaking with you soon.